So, I think we're getting a little bit too liberal with what constitutes as a documentary.
In the new documentary, Who is Luigi Mangione? Producers at Investigation Discovery attempt to uncover clues about the high-profile murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
Who is Luigi Mangione is the new documentary making a deep dive into how a brilliant young man from a wealthy family landed behind bars.
Manhunt, Luigi Mangione and the CEO murder. The breaking new 2020 event special, Thursday night on ABC.
If you haven't already guessed by the title, today we're talking about media coverage surrounding Luigi Mangione. Quick recap if you're unaware, but back in December, Luigi made national news for the alleged assassination of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. I say alleged because he has not been found guilty, although some of these documentaries don't really want to acknowledge that. Anyway, it's a very sexy story, in part because of Luigi himself. He was the valedictorian of his class, he had an Ivy League education, clearly a very smart and well-liked kid. It's currently believed that he was motivated to kill Thompson due to his chronic back injury and the fact that he was growing increasingly frustrated with the American healthcare system. Luigi is also very conventionally attractive, which no doubt plays a part in his rabid circle of supporters across the US, and the fact that he tapped into a very real, palpable anger about the American healthcare system makes the story all the more interesting. So here's the thing. The story itself is interesting, but it's not complicated. And that is the issue with making documentaries about stories like this one, because I think a documentary, like, as a medium, requires you to, have some kind of question that you want to answer in a grounded and unique way by talking to the people involved and getting new perspectives and, like, uncovering something that, no one else has thought of before and tackling it in a very specific way and making a specific, intricate argument. But this story is so straightforward that it doesn't warrant that kind of analysis, and it's also so new that it doesn't, like, have the benefit of having any, like, retrospective material available yet, It only happened like 2 months ago. So I watched 4 documentaries for this video, and all of them have their own, various flaws and tropes and issues that we'll get into, but the one thing that I found at the center of them all is that, like, they're not actually interested in answering any of these questions. They're just, like, empty shells to stuff with content that we've already seen before. And that sucks, right? Like, that kinda sucks. So I'm gonna go through all 4 of these documentaries. I'll give a brief kind of synopsis of each of them, what makes them unique and different from one another, and then we'll talk about kind of the problems within all of them collectively. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the documentary that came out in December, just a few days after the events of all of this unfolded. It is the 2020 special, oh my god, I forgot the name. Give me 1 second. Manhunt, Luigi Mangione and the CEO Murder, a special edition of 2020. All these titles are a mouthful. Anyway, Manhunt, Luigi Mangione, and the CEO Murder is a special edition of the show 2020. If you're unfamiliar, 2020 is an American news magazine program that typically focuses on high-interest true crime stories. This documentary aired just 15 days after Brian Thompson's killing and 10 days after Mangione's arrest. And so typically when people saw this title card floating around online, the natural reaction was to be like, how do they already have a documentary about this guy? What could possibly be in here that we don't already know? And the answer is not much. This documentary is probably the best out of the 4 I've watched, at the very least because it is relatively journalistic in nature, and while it's still sensationalized, it's very self-aware about what it is and the information that it's trying to present. The entire runtime barely extends to 40 minutes, and it's mostly an exact narration of the timeline of Brian Thompson's murder to the subsequent manhunt and arrest of Luigi. They bring in a bunch of ABC-affiliated reporters and analysts to give more insight into what it was like covering the story as it unfolded, and they bring in a couple of experts to talk about the tech used in the assassination and why specifically they believe Luigi decided to use a ghost gun. That stuff is all, like, fine. I think if you are looking for a pretty comprehensive timeline timeline of how this story unfolded, then this is perfectly serviceable. And honestly, I think most of these documentaries are pretty solid in that regard because that's the most like straightforward part of the narrative, and news organizations and documentary production companies have been doing this forever. They know the true crime reenactment and recounting formula. The issue is when they try to fill the runtime with other things, primarily information about Luigi's backstory or attempted analysis at the social and cultural implications of all of this. We'll get into this a bit more later after I describe all of the documentaries because all of them have this problem. The last thing I'll say about the 2021 though is that while it tries its best to keep it tight, you can tell that they were like stretching for content at points. For example, they have Perez Hilton in here giving, bare bones commentary about how people online think that Luigi Mangione is hot. Okay, great. And this makes sense because as I was doing a little bit of research about the special, apparently at one point they said that it was going to include audio of Luigi Mangione in his travels to Japan last year, but that material was apparently excluded from the final broadcast. And so you can tell kind of like the parts that they had to backfill. I give this like a 5 out of 10. Not terrible. It gets worse from here. I'm just keeping my phone here because there's no way I'm gonna remember all of these titles off the top of my head. The next one that we're talking about is TMZ Investigates Luigi Mangione, The Mind of a Killer. This documentary, produced by TMZ and currently available on Hulu and a couple of other places, is the most like chronically online of the bunch. We'll touch more on the tropes of these things in a bit, but it's very highly sensationalized. They have the dramatic music, all of the endless SOT mashes and sound clips. It's schlocky, it's obnoxious, but what strikes me about this one is two things. One, the format in which this is presented, because it's basically Harvey Levin of TMZ fame in a room, and then he sort of interviews the guests speaking about this topic on a TV in front of him. Like, the guests come on to explain what's going on to him instead of just like, I don't know, like a typical virtual call or like being in person. It's a little like game showy, like dystopian game show vibes. And so not only do they bring on the typical analysts and experts, but like I said, they also have some guests who are speaking to the whole online kind of analysis aspect of this. And the two that jump scared me in particular were Cenk Uygur and Taylor Lorenz. Cenk, of course, did like his typical bit. He was speaking to, the frustration of the American people and how that has to do with, the pitfalls of the American healthcare system. And Taylor spoke more to like the social kind of phenomenon surrounding Luigi and why younger people sort of view him as this hero that's being unfairly vilified by the establishment. I can't play it for copyright because God knows that Harvey Levin will kick my teeth in and bury me in the ground. But the whole time Harvey is very combative to Taylor when she's explaining this. There's a particular moment where she's explaining the sort of high-profile anti-billionaire sentiment among younger people, and Harvey's like, there was a time in my life where like, we didn't have billionaires, but we had millionaires like the Rockefellers, and these people were seen as aspirational. And this is my problem with all of the social commentary in these documentaries, because it's like, how is it not obvious to you? Not even in relation to this specific case, but just like about like the social and cultural direction that the United States and also the rest of the world is heading right now. How is it so impossible for you to grasp the concept that things are very different now than they were 30, 20, even 10 years ago? I just think that if you can't understand this very easy thing to understand, then where do you get off doing any social commentary about this situation? Especially when you have somebody like Taylor Lorenz, who is like very well versed in online culture, explaining these Gen Z and younger cultural attitudes to you, and you're just like, when I was younger, it was different. The last notable thing here is that the big get that TMZ proclaimed to have are, interviews with these two German tourists whose identities are obscured, who claim to have spent time with Luigi in Thailand before, he got back to America and disappeared off the face of the earth, right? And so Harvey asks them, like, what was notable about spending time with Luigi, and the two things that they say, the first one is that he went to a shooting range. He just, like, went to one. And Harvey's like, tell me what he said about it. And they were like, he said it was expensive. And that's it. And the second thing is that he was obsessed with this book from this author in India. And they told Harvey that Luigi told them that he was going to buy 400 copies of this. It's worth noting here that the author of this book says that this is not true, and that 400 books were never bought. He tried to buy 400 copies, but the transaction was apparently flagged and rejected, and he only bought one copy of the book, and he is telling TMZ to retract the information. I found this documentary to be very obnoxious. I found Harvey Levin to be very obnoxious. At the very least, I think some of the guests were kind of interesting. Maybe. 4 out of 10. Up next, we have a documentary from the New York Post called New York Post Presents Luigi Mangione, Monster or Martyr. So this documentary was definitely the longest out of the 4 that I watched, and it was definitely my least favorite. This one tries to do kind of what the ABC 2021 did, where they're trying to like reenact and reconstruct this timeline from the perspective of the New York Post reporters who were following the story. The problem with this one is that it is very bloated and there's nothing of substance really covered here that we don't already know. There are so many talking heads in this thing, and aside from the actual New York Post reporters, I can't tell you who any of them are, what significant expertise they bring to the narrative. At one point they interview a comedian who did a set at the Comedy Cellar about it after it happened and apparently like got a lot of views or whatever, and that's great, but like, is that kind of material really needed for a documentary? There's also a dead giveaway here for how I know it's a lackluster documentary, and I always look for stuff like this. There is a difference in documentaries when you're watching them and you can see that like the camera crew actually took the time to interview the person. You know, they took the time to set up an interview, they're in the room together, maybe the documentarian and the person being interviewed are having an exchange with one another, versus like when the people saying anything of significance are just news clips being referenced by other people who did those interviews. For example, there are 2, clips in here of people talking about how they used to know Luigi Mangione. One of them is from like CNN and the other one is from a Fox affiliate interview. So like the New York Post team didn't do either of those interviews. But of course, if you're watching a documentary like this, the thing that is probably of most significance to you is getting to know more about the case and about Luigi as a person. So of course those sound bites need to be in there, but you didn't do anything to get them. This is just a clip show. It's just a bloated clip show. This was bad. This was lazy. I learned nothing. 1 out of 10. The next one that we're going to be talking about was produced by the folks at Investigation Discovery. It's available to watch on HBO Max. It's called Who is Luigi Mangione? And it's probably the most controversial of the bunch. So this documentary came out on February 17th, which is, again, not that long after the initial incident took place, but because the other ones were made so soon, this one, I guess, has the benefit of a little bit of distance. The interviews here are actually pretty significant because they took the time to, for real, talk to people who knew Luigi Mangione. We'll get into the validity of, like, the personal documentary testimonial in a little bit, but, like, can I say that for some of these other documentaries? No. Also, one of the interviews in this documentary is so significant that it's causing actual problems with the validity of the Luigi Mangione case, because the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, sat down with HBO and discussed evidence and theories surrounding the case that have not been turned over by prosecutors. So if anything, I guess this documentary is significant for, that, but also at the very least, I guess it does live up to its title, Who is Luigi Mangione? It does the best job out of the 4 of diving into his background and, what could cause him to do such a thing. All of that is done fine enough. This documentary is the only one of the 4 that also dives into the life and perspective of former United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. They interview people who knew him as well. They characterize him as sort of this humble, smart boy from Iowa who worked his way up the corporate ladder. What surprised me is that I think as honest as they could get is how honest they got with, like, the aspect of how the health insurance system in the United States could have led to a predicament like this. They do interview one woman in particular who has dealt with like a chronic condition and who has had issues, getting surgeries approved because of health insurance. They don't shy away from it, but they do contrast it pretty heavily with the executive producer's voice in this documentary, Dan Abrams, who is like a known TV personality. He's kind of featured all throughout this documentary, and the main thing that he talks about is the, heroification of Luigi's actions and why that's wrong. He talks about how he, offered this perspective on his radio show, and he had like endless amounts of people calling in to yell at him about why he was wrong and why, what Luigi's doing is correct. And this is the same issue that I had with Harvey Levin in the TMZ documentary, where it's very much like old man yells at cloud. And like I said, a lot of these documentary companies are trying to make this more of like a complicated predicament than it actually is, because if you see the story for what it is, again, it's pretty simple to understand, and it's pretty simple to understand why people are defending him so vigorously. I guess this documentary is the most comprehensive in how it's presented. There are actual interviews that haven't just been like clipped from elsewhere, so it does have value in that regard. The main problem with this one that I find is that it's probably like the tropiest of the four. Like it's super obnoxious in how it's presented, and I guess this is as good of a time as any to transition into talking about some of those tropes. For now, I will give this one, I don't know, a 4 out of 10, sure. So you might be wondering what I mean by trope, and I mean that every one of these documentaries, especially those like kind of produced in the modern true crime style, all have this very similar tone and vibe. It was started by like Dateline and then kind of got like bastardized into like the streaming version of itself. And so what I mean is it's a lot of like, you know, fast highlights of news clips and scary music, and it's made to like, you know, evoke all of these emotions at once, and it's very over the top. And to show you what I'm talking about, I'm just gonna make one right now. Like, I'm just gonna make one. So I'm gonna make one of these scary documentary Luigi Mangione compilations. So basically, start scary true crime music. See what we got. Yeah, this'll do for now. This is fine. Just gonna find Luigi Mangione news clip.
Back to the man accused of brazenly murdering the United Healthcare CEO in Midtown Manhattan last year. The accused was back in court today. Luigi Mangione.
Let's do like a News Nation clip, because I always see a News Nation clip in these.
It's a story that captivated much of the country, and now legal defense donations are once again pouring in for Luigi Mangione. He is the man accused of murdering the United Healthcare CEO.
All right, so now let's get some like voices of the people. So like Luigi Mangione protest. Let's see what we got.
Divided, the people united will never be divided.
Yep. Okay, now let's do like a popular like late night comedy clip, and then we'll end it with like him like yelling. You kind of like layer the music in this way.
Back to the man accused of brazenly murdering the United Healthcare CEO in Midtown Manhattan last year. The accused was back in court today. Luigi Mangione.
It's a story that captivated much of the country, and now legal defense donations are once again pouring in for Luigi Mangione.
Divided, the people united will never be divided.
So then, to reinforce like the support by the people, I'm gonna go to the next part of this news clip.
Man accused of murdering the United Healthcare CEO. Donations are now at nearly $300,000. The initial goal was $200,000.
I play around a little bit with the music, but I'll show you the final product.
Back to the man accused of brazenly murdering the United Healthcare CEO in Midtown Manhattan last year. The accused was back in court today. Luigi Mangione.
It's a story that captivated much of the country, and now legal defense donations are once again pouring in for Luigi Mangione. He is the man accused of murdering the United Healthcare CEO.
Divided, the people united will never be divided.
Donations are now at nearly $300,000. The initial goal was $200,000, but that has since been raised to $500,000.
That's right. The healthcare assassin Luigi Mangione has got women and gay guys alike all hot and bothered. I mean, seriously.
Completely out of touch and insult the intelligence of the American people and the lived experience.
So tell me about when you first met Luigi Mangione.
I first met Luigi in 6th grade. It was the first day of school, and we were all going around like saying fun facts about each other, you know, favorite foods, whatever. And they got to him, and he said his favorite movie was Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, which is, I mean, you know, it's kind of the worst one. And I, you know, from then on, I just always kind of thought, you know, something's not right with him.
And, you know, have you seen him recently? Did you ever see him after 6th grade?
No. Actually, my parents got divorced after that year, so I moved in with my dad, and I had to switch schools. So, no.
In the pursuit of unraveling secrets of some of these true crime cases, a lot of times what these documentarians like to do is find people who have one point been associated with the subject in question and can speak to their character or their personality in a way that does not compromise them legally. So for example, in all 4 of these documentaries, a family member of Luigi Mangione was never interviewed. They've been very quiet this whole time, and that's who you really want to hear from at the end of the day, right? But you're never going to hear from any of those people in these documentaries because they're legally implicated by the ongoing case. So, you know, they pour through the phone books, metaphorically speaking, and the internet, and they find these people who have crossed paths with Luigi at one point in time. That's why you get a lot of, like, former high school classmates, teachers, camp counselors, randos who, like, have no actual significance to the story, knew Luigi at, you know, a completely different time in his life prior to, you know, what actually that we know of caused him to kind of go down this path. And 90% of the time it's always like, oh yeah, he was a nice kid, like I never thought he would have done something like this, like that's crazy. And it really bothers me when they do this kind of thing with ongoing cases because yeah, you know, there's this kind of cult of personality and sense of fascination that develops with these high profile, you know, figures involved in true crime, especially somebody like Luigi, right? I understand that you want to know as much about him as possible, but if a documentarian was actually interested in making something that was like well-rounded and, you know, personified him in an interesting and unique and grounded way, they would wait until the case was over so that they could actually talk to people who were like relevant to the situation. But instead, they pull little Johnny Appleseed from bumfuck nowhere who maybe shared a blunt with Luigi in college once. It's not storytelling, it's content farming, and I'm so tired of it. So a lot of these documentaries have these TikTok montages kind of like thrown in there. We'll talk about the value of those. I mean, there is value in it for sure, but like, they cherry pick them to make like Gen Z and folks younger who use TikTok out to be like the stupidest, like, nonsensical, uneducated buffoons on the planet. And I think that does a bit of an injustice to the topic at hand. I probably played an example of this when I was showing B-roll from the trailers in, you know, one of these documentaries because all of them have this. Every single documentary has like an absurd TikTok compilation, and I understand this, right? Because TikTok has sort of become like the front page of the internet where if you want to get a snapshot of how people are feeling about something, that's like the first place that you go. I have often set the stage of videos with montages of TikTok compilations where people talk about a different topic and give different perspectives on it. Like, that's an easy way to set the stage for navigating discourse, and I totally understand that. But what each one of these documentaries is guilty of doing is cherry picking the most absurd of these TikToks to make, you know, this certain profile of people who are fans of Luigi Mangione look as stupid as humanly fucking possible. So like in every single documentary, I think I saw the clip of like the kid doing the Charlie XCX apple dance outside of the prison, or like all of the Luigi thirst traps. And yeah, there are, you know, things to say about those pockets of people online, and I understand how Luigi's conventional attractiveness plays into it, the fandom surrounding true crime in particular. All of that is interesting, and I would like to hear somebody who has an actual expertise and background on the subject talk about it, but these people don't, right? They want to cherry pick this stuff to go, haha, look at these kids being stupid. And sure, some of them are stupid, probably. But also, like, if you really want to sit down and learn about why Gen Z kind of has this fervor for Luigi Mangione and what he represents in terms of, like, you know, the anti-billionaire sentiment and the rigged capitalist system and, you know, the animosity that people have toward their healthcare companies here in America, why don't you, like, talk to people? Bring in some Gen Z kid who's working, you know, a mid-salary job in some random city and has gotten fucked over by their health insurance company. There's a billion out there. I can point them to you directly. And you might argue that that's a waste of time and resources in a documentary like this, but, like, I don't think it is, because that's the story, right? You want to know why these people are defending this kid and why they're so obsessed with him and why they view him as a hero. Talk to them. Don't just cherry pick some TikTok bullshit. That's lazy. It's lazy. In conclusion, none of these documentaries needed to exist because the story's not over yet. They are basically like content farmed clip shows with the word documentary in the marketing to make them all look more official and presentable. than they actually are. Even if some of them do have like a higher production quality and they go out of their way to get actual interviews, there's really nothing of substance within any of these that like, you know, goes beyond the surface level informing of the case. There's nothing here that makes you like critically think or reevaluate any perspectives. If anything, some of these documentaries are actually like impeding, you know, Luigi's right to a fair trial, some would argue. I would skip them if I were you. I would probably just watch some news coverage because we're not far away from it for these documentaries to make any kind of significant impact. So those are my thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. A couple of quick reminders. Tomorrow we are hosting a live stream during the Oscar ceremony starting on this channel at 7 p.m. EST. It's going to be me and my partner Brian, and we're going to be live all night long, just reacting in real time. So if you want to come hang out with our community in the chat, feel free to come on by. It's going to be a great time. Second thing, I have these two videos here if you missed them, and I'm promoting them heavily because, I don't know, the algorithm sucks, guys. January was kind to me, February less so. So if you haven't seen these videos from me, definitely go take a look at them. I really like how both of them came out, and I think you will as well. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.